Let's look now at braking mechanics for the inside heel hook. Whenever we have very powerful opponents who are skilled in leg lock defense, as a general rule, we favor inside heel hooks over outside heel hooks. The reason for this is easy to explain. When we go into any form of outside heel hook, most of the damage goes in a curve on the outside of your training partner's ankle up through the outside of the knee, in particular the LCL ligament. Damage to the LCL is certainly considerable, but of all the knee ligaments, it's the one which is affected the least by damage in some kind of heel hook context. An LCL can be torn quite severely and still recover without the need for surgical intervention. We often find that opponents can continue to fight even after an LCL has been quite severely torn or sprained. In the case of an inside heel hook, almost all the damage gets applied to the MCL and to a lesser degree the ACL. Damage to the MCL tends to be much more damaging to my opponent's athleticism. In addition, it tends to be felt much more by the athlete as the move is being enacted, and as a result it tends to have a higher finishing percentage when you're in a very competitive situation. Let's have a look at braking mechanics for the inside heel hook. Different elements which stand a little bit in contrast to the outside heel hook situation. First, some things don't change. When we go in here, one of the main problems we face is heel slippage. Once again, if my forearm lines up with my opponent's lower leg, it's easier for him to point his toes and slip his heel inside. So one of the habits we always want to get into is that of taking our forearm in line with our training partner's foot, not the lower leg. Once we get into a situation like this, one of our favorite ways to act is to come up to a single shoulder finish. I'm going to drive my hips forward and bring a single shoulder down towards the mat so that my hips come well up off the floor. As a result, from this kind of situation, I can lock a full senkaku underneath my training partner's legs. This puts tremendous weight over my opponent's leg. And now, as the hips come forward and the elbow goes back, we get a fantastic amount of braking pressure. Even drilling this is deeply uncomfortable for your training partner. I apologize. You can see what happens as I drive my body weight forward. I prevent his foot from moving by putting my shoulder down to the mat. As my shoulder essentially pins my opponent's foot to the floor, the hips take over. Now as the hips follow, even with no hands, you can see there's tremendous braking pressure. So essentially the braking mechanic on a single shoulder finish is always pin the foot and follow with the hips. So we lock. I'm going to demonstrate with one hand so that I don't hurt my training partner. I put my shoulder to the mat. My hips come off the floor, so there's body weight over the leg. I won't lock a triangle because that would be too severe on my training partner. As my hips go forward, we get a very severe break indeed. This would be a single shoulder finish. This stands in contrast to another form of finish which I also greatly favor, a flat back finish. In a flat back finish, as always, we line everything up with the foot, but instead of going to a single shoulder, we go to two shoulders. When we lock up in this position, I take both shoulders back towards the mat, so my back is flat on the floor. Then from here, my 2 feet pressure downwards, usually in a senkaku position. Then I take my right elbow and I push it towards my training partner's crotch. As a result, you get exemplary braking pressure. Once again, a flat back finish. We get our forearm lined up with our training partner. We resist the temptation to bring the hooking hand forwards. People so often go to lock their hands by bringing the hook hand forwards. No, we always bring the support hand to the hook hand so that our wrist stays in the optimal braking position. Now I roll my 2 shoulders back towards the floor, lock my senkaku, and I drive my hips up, my feet down, and I drive my elbow towards his crotch. Your opponent's defensive reaction is to come up off the floor. He has to do it or the leg will break if he stays down on his butt. Once we get to this position, we lock the Senkaku, everything back, I straighten my body out, and we go back pointing the elbow at the crotch, and it's a very, very powerful finish indeed. A third very useful breaking position occurs in situations where either my opponent steps over in this direction as a means of rotating out of the lock. That's one way it could happen. Or it might happen because I willingly tilt my training partner over. However it happens, we've tilted our opponent over in this direction. Now he's inverted, but I'm still facing the ceiling just like so. In these situations, I point myself onto my outside shoulder. From an outside single shoulder finish, I take my 2 feet and pressure them into the side of his body and bring my pelvis off the mat. Now I point my elbow directly at my training partner's hips, and from here we get extreme amounts of breaking pressure. Just as we did with the outside heel hook, we're looking at the idea of breaking our opponent through a huge amount of rotation. That's something we must become skilled at. You never know which way your opponent is going to move in the middle of a leg lock confrontation. You must be able to break in more than one position and get powerful breaking mechanics in all of them. So once again, we start off with a single shoulder finish. From here, we pin the foot, utilizing the shoulder, and drive our pelvis forward into the lock. Then we saw the idea of a flat back finish, where I lock a Senkaku, and from here, straighten my body out, point my elbow, my training partner's crotch, for a strong finish. If he steps over my body, we go to an outside single shoulder finish. I lift my hips off the floor, elbow points at his hips, and again, we get a fantastically strong break.